This video is not presenting a theory that I believe in. This is not presenting an interpretation of the text that I feel must be true or ought to be true. It's discussing a possibility that's placed within the text that George might or might not choose to act on. So now I have to insert a sort of caveat. If you don't know, George's writing of the A Song of Ice and Fire series is in large part improvised. He made a decision as an artist at an early stage that he was not going to fully script out or fully plan these books, that he was going to make up as he went along many fundamental aspects of the plot. Now, people knew that for decades, for years and years and years. He had commented on it in interviews. He had written about it in articles or in blogs. But nevertheless, people were shocked when there was a leaked version of an early plan for the books, the original proposal that went to the publishing company, that seemed to reflect a totally different scheme, totally different concept of what the books would be, including, most shockingly, you may have heard this, the plans at that stage included plans for a romance between Jon Snow and Arya Stark. Now, when you know that, and you go back and look at Book 1 as it was printed in its final form, you can still see bits and pieces of that plan for the plot. You can still see some echoes, some foreshadowing, that there could have been a romance between Jon Snow and Arya when Arya got a few years older, whatever. That was part of the plan for the book. Now, when you're done being grossed out, what you have to recognize is, throughout all of the books, there is foreshadowing that, in a sense, foreshadows nothing, because they reflect ideas that the author picked up, played with for a while, and then set down, decided not to act on. Now, I'm not saying this as a complaint. I actually do not think it weakens A Song of Ice and Fire as a work of literature. I think what it means is that as a reader, you encounter a lot of ideas that are set down in the text and presented to you simply as ideas for your interest. And you cannot look at them as if they're bricks in a wall, as if they're supporting an edifice in some strictly logical way that follows a kind of boring plot pattern that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you really believe that, then it's an absurd example, but it's a real one. You have to look at Jon Snow's relationship with Arya in Book 1 as foreshadowing something, which we all know now is never going to happen. There's a lot of foreshadowing for different possible explanations for Jon Snow's parentage. I think it's quite possible that one of the reasons why you have multiple competing possibilities is that George himself hadn't decided entirely what direction he might want to take it in. Now, yes, it's also true from the reader's perspective. It's there so there are multiple possibilities just to entertain you. There are just different ideas to pique your interest. That's completely true. Objectively, as a reader, that's true. But subjectively, for the author in that creative process, which he has been honest with us about, he's also all the time setting up interesting ideas that he can later play with in the plot, or he can choose not to play with. One of the possibilities right now that people are excited about, because the television show plot has moved faster than the book plot, it has always been possible that Cersei had a first child before the 3 children that we see on the TV show, that she had a first child that survived and was raised in secret and could re-enter the plot. And then it was also possible that her secret child is Gendry, who we know, as a young adult on the TV show. I guess he's a teenager in the books. But on the TV show, he's like a fully grown man, because whatever, that's how they cast it. But in the books, he's a young blacksmith. Okay, that possibility was definitely put in the text by George R.R. Martin. When he put it there, I don't think he had an absolute firm notion of what he would do with it. He put some kind of provocative, vague suggestions into the text. And I think, again, just based on his own statement about his creative process, he could take it in one direction or another. Now, when I was talking about this with my teacher here in China, I remember she was completely shocked at that. When I said, "Oh, yeah, but it's quite possible that Gendry is actually the son of Cersei Lannister, that his biological mother is Cersei Lannister," she was shocked. She was totally, totally shocked. And I said, yeah, both in the book and in the TV show, if you pay really close attention, that possibility is actually established. But that's all it is. It's a possibility, and the author may not act on it. And when he first, put those pieces on the board, he may not have had any firm idea of what he wanted to do with them. Okay? I under that heading, some people think this is crazy, but as a work of literature, A Song of Ice and Fire contains so much criticism of the basic assumptions, basic social beliefs of feudalism, such an attack on notions of bloodline as well as notions of justice. So many of the fundamental beliefs that hold together a feudal society are held up to scorn and contempt and ridicule and satire and questioning by George Martin, by the author. It is really possible that we will have a complex story presented to us about Jon Snow, but then we will find out that the babies were switched at one point in the story, and that somewhere else, somewhere unknown to us as readers, there's a white-haired baby growing up, as a miller's son or on a farm doing some normal job. Somewhere else there's the other Jon Snow, and the Jon Snow we've known in this plot doesn't have any connection by bloodline to House Targaryen. We thought he did, but they switched the babies. Now, if you've read the books, there is foreshadowing for that possibility, because there is so much talk about switching babies, and Jon Snow himself finds himself in a political situation in which he chooses to secretly switch two babies. There are several other plot lines involving babies being switched. So would I come on here and say to you that I know for a fact, or that I think it must be the case, that Jon Snow as a baby was switched? No, that's ridiculous. I would say not only is it impossible for me to know that based on text, I don't think George Martin, writing in the style that he writes, using the creative process, I don't think he would have known himself. I think George set up that possibility, and it's one of many possibilities that, again, they're there for the reader to enjoy as different ideas, and they're also, in a sense, there for him to enjoy, because to a remarkable extent, he's making it up as he goes along. There is an improvised character to these books. Some people get uncomfortable or get defensive when you talk about that. I don't think there's any reason to be defensive about it. That is part of the style of this remarkable work of literature. Okay? Barbrey Dustin tells us a number of things that actually force us to reevaluate the whole plot, the whole basic family scenario for House Stark. I'm going to make things simpler, I'm going to refer to Ned Stark's older brother just as his older brother, because some people watching this will be very confused if I use names. But on the TV show, it's not really clear to you. Ned Stark was not supposed to inherit power. He was not supposed to inherit political authority. He only inherited it because his older brother died an unexpected and untimely death. A violent, gruesome death. And if you're reading the books, or even if you're watching the TV show, early on, if you're reading in a critical way, and you have an appreciation for how critical the author's mind is, George R.R. Martin's mind, you start wondering, why does everyone pretend that Ned Stark is such a great guy? Why is he this paragon of virtue? He seems okay, but he seems human. He doesn't seem like the greatest ruler or political figure in the land. And pretty soon, we see him making mistakes, making the wrong decisions, making questionable political decisions. Even the execution that we see at the very start of the books, the iconic execution that, Bran and the other children witness, there are questions. Ned Stark doesn't seem to the reader this paragon of virtue. But I think in reading it in order, you start to figure out early on, okay, so Ned is seen as a paragon of virtue compared to people like Joffrey. Ned is seen as a paragon of virtue compared to House Bolton. There are these other houses that seem remarkably dark and evil and dubious, and now we start to see, okay, Ned, who's already died in the plot by this point when you're really getting this evidence, okay, so it's not that Ned is the greatest ruler or the greatest political figure. It's not that Ned had a perfect sense of justice, but he was better than the alternatives. Okay, you get this. Then Barbrey Dustin shows up so many years into your reading, depending on how many years you took to read the books, or so many hundreds of pages. And Barbrey Dustin gives us another consideration. Maybe Ned seemed like an outstanding, positive figure politically, in contrast to his own older brother. Right? So Ned's older brother, who would have become the ruler if he hadn't died in ludicrous, surreal circumstances. Not even worth describing here if you guys don't know. Most people watching this video already know the story. Some of you do, some of you don't. But what George did, what the author did, George Martin did, brilliantly, he didn't describe how terrible a person Ned's older brother was by giving us the perspective of someone who hated him. Instead, he lets us figure out how terrible this older brother was from the perspective of someone who loved him and someone who still carries a torch for him, namely Barbrey Dustin. That is brilliant writing. That is a brilliant choice. And even more striking, he has her delivering this monologue, as Barbrey Dustin explaining this to someone who doesn't question her in any way. It's Theon Greyjoy, but it's Theon when he's really in a very mentally broken state. He's not going to cross-examine her or call her a hypocrite or anything else. Theon is almost mute in listening to this monologue. He says a few things. So this is brilliant, and I think some people may pass the scene by without realizing its gravity and its significance for the plot. Rape is a significant theme throughout all these books. The fear of rape in war, the significance of rape in peacetime, the way rape shapes and reshapes the feudal alliances and marriages, and the way rape fits into the ethics of knightly valor, the difference between a knight and a soldier, the difference between being civilized and being barbaric. Rape is a really significant theme. Okay? What Barbrey Dustin tells us, with no ambiguity, was that Ned Stark's older brother was a serial rapist. She does not use terms that damning, but it is completely clear from her testimony that Ned Stark's older brother, whenever he was attracted to somebody, would immediately rape them. And this is very serious. Now, this links to another major plot thread that some of you may not know about, but some of you have known about for years. The fact that Robb Stark's father was not Ned, but was Ned's older brother. Once you know what Barbrey Dustin has told you, then you can go back and look at Catelyn Tully's plotline. Catelyn Tully, who becomes Catelyn Stark, who becomes Lady Stoneheart. So the mother of most of the Stark children. It's very clear that Catelyn had sex with Ned's older brother prior to having sex with Ned. And for all kinds of reasons, that's not that surprising. If you go through, the arrangements to be married and then the arrangements had to be changed, it's not surprising. But it's completely clear that prior to legally marrying her, Ned's older brother, raped this young woman, or she didn't have a choice in the matter, the same way Ned's older brother raped Barbrey Dustin. And then you go back and you can look at exactly what Catelyn says when she's looking at her children, when she's looking at Robb in contrast to her other kids. And, she says these kids look like Ned and this kid looks like its father. Some of the wording is very carefully chosen by George just to leave that possibility. It may never be acted on. The books may end without another word ever being said about Catelyn Tully's love life, prior to her marriage with Ned or otherwise. The door may never be closed on it. Those pieces may have been put on the chessboard so that, as he was writing the books, George had the possibility. It's there as a provocative idea. It's there as an interesting idea for the reader. It's stimulating. But it may go nowhere. It may be foreshadowing nothing. And it also may have foreshadowed a plot that was abandoned. Right? Because in the earlier drafts of the book, Catelyn was supposed to go north of the wall. Right? She was supposed to go up to the far north and fight the others and die. That's in the earlier draft that got leaked. So all kinds of very, very different ideas for the plot have been entertained by George, and a lot of them have been abandoned. So the fact that these things are there doesn't mean they matter for what happens next in the plot. But they still matter as ideas. They still matter thematically. Okay? So Barbrey Dustin lays down what should be the shocking revelation that Ned Stark's older brother was really a terrible human being. And, this makes sense. It draws together so many of the little bits of information we already knew about Ned Stark's older brother. we knew about him, marching to the capital city and shouting at the king's castle. Ned Stark's older brother literally stood in the streets with his sword shouting that he wanted to murder the crown prince. That was the crime he committed, and surprise, surprise, Ned Stark's older brother was executed for this. What a shock. In any feudal medieval society, the fact that this was the punishment for his conduct is not surprising. I know people call the Mad King, they call him the Mad King, they call him bad names, but that particular decision in that political and legal context is not that surprising. And now we learn he wasn't just impetuous about threatening to murder members of the royal family in the streets of the capital city in front of the... In fact, he was also a serial rapist. He was impetuous in these other ways, right? So right away, this opens up other possibilities. Now look, it is possible that the candy-coated story of Jon Stark having magical Targaryen blood is the whole story, and that's it. But you guys know George plays by his own rules, and appearance is hereditary in the books in a way that's convenient. It really is possible that, along with the baby switching motif, that we'll find out that, you know what, Lyanna did give birth to a baby that had white hair, or at least violet eyes, or some of the other distinctive Targaryen features. And it's not Jon. Baby's got switched, so that baby is somewhere else. Maybe that baby was left in Dorne. There are all these other possibilities set up. And that would suit George R.R. Martin's overall thematic concerns. That really is, I think, a possibility. May not be a possibility that's acted on, or may be hinted at in the book and never resolved. All these things can remain open and undecided. But the other possibility is that Jon Stark's bloodline is 110% Northern, which is both how he looks and also relates to the type of magic he uses. Jon doesn't have dragon magic. Jon seems to have a double dose of the distinctive magic of the far north, the skin-changing ability, etc., right? There have been no indications, unlike, say, Tyrion, there's no indication that Jon has dragon dreams. You know exactly what kind of dreams Jon has. You know exactly what kind of magical abilities Jon has. So it does set up the real possibility that among the victims of among the victims of Eddard Stark's older brother, who we now know to be a violent serial rapist, and we know this from the perspective of Barbrey Dustin, it is possible that among his victims was Lyanna Stark. So if Lyanna Stark was pregnant because she was raped in this fashion that we have other witnesses to and what have you, then suddenly we have a very different motivation, both for her escaping Winterfell, for her running away, which is the basic fact of the story we know about, and her seeking the help and protection of the Targaryen family. We also have a very different explanation for why her brother would suddenly run away, suicidally run away to the capital city, threatening to murder the crown prince, which is idiotic. To call it a crime of passion is an insult to crimes of passion, right? So there's several other possibilities set up by Barbrey Dustin. Barbrey Dustin tells us she has a network of spies. She has her own army and her own spies. She tells us she's not going to let a certain decapitated head reach Winterfell. She's not going to let certain bones and remains reach Winterfell. She tells us that she's out for revenge, but at this stage of the story, in fact, she's already had her revenge. It's very unclear what she's going to do next. There's quite a lot to speculate on. And interestingly, what was it? Robb Stark's decapitated head is supposed to be going to the capital city. So some people theorized that Robb Stark's head was actually put on top of the Mountain's body in making Gregor Clegane into an undead monster in the books, obviously not in the TV show. But the remains of Ned Stark, they were supposed to be going north to Winterfell. Barbrey Dustin has supposedly stolen them. All kinds of crazy questions arise from this. So there's a lot there. There's a lot of material there. Again, my point in this video is not to say I have the correct interpretation, nobody else does. I think that George sets up myriad possibilities very intentionally to make the books more intellectually stimulating, and to make his own creative process more rewarding. But the result is there's a lot of foreshadowing for things that are never going to happen, and there are a lot of things introduced that are thematically significant, but that will never be significant for the plot.